there's been an outcry over the introduction of mandatory vaccines, in some quarters at least, in this country, and that relates to mandatory vaccines in the workplace. Government is yet to decide on the matter, but NEDLAC said it should be implemented depending on the risk. A recent study by the University of Johannesburg and the Human Sciences Research Council shows that over half of the adults surveyed support vaccine mandates, and 75% of the fully vaccinated support the policy. For more on this, I'm joined now by Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller from the Human Sciences Research Council to help us unpack those numbers. I did expect that a significant number of people would be in support, Professor Bohler-Muller, would be in support of mandatory vaccination, but I didn't expect that it would be at about 54%. I don't know what I was expecting. I thought opinion would be really divided, about 30% each in 3 blocks, if we were to put it in that way. Just tell me about your findings. What questions did you ask, and what outcome came back from that?
Thank you for having me on the show, and good afternoon. So the survey, it was the first time that we asked a question about mandatory vaccines. It was in the 5th round of the survey between October and November of this year. And we also didn't know what to expect. So the overall percentages for acceptance of compulsory vaccination, as you say, is 54%. But there is a big difference between acceptance of those who have been vaccinated or want to be vaccinated and those unwilling to vaccinate. So you mentioned 75% of people who have been vaccinated or want to be vaccinated are in support of this policy, but only 10% of the core of people who do not want to be vaccinated at all support this. So there will always be a group of people, generally a loud minority, who are not going to support this. The other question we asked was around whether people would be willing to produce evidence of vaccination when going into a public place. And here the support was also over 50%, it was at 51%. So if you had to produce a vaccine to go into a municipal building, into a place of worship, into a restaurant or sporting stadium, the overall percentages were at 51%. But when people were asked about these specific places, it was sort of a multi-answer question. People were most willing to produce evidence of vaccines at sporting stadiums and least willing to do so at places of worship.
That kind of makes sense, right? Because, I think sporting venues is more the leisure activities as opposed to something that strikes at the fundamental rights, such as the right to freedom of religion. I'm not sure what level of detail you went into, but I do imagine doing the work that you do, you then sought to understand why the outcomes are what they are. As you try and analyze the data, what comes through, why is it that 54% are willing, are supportive of mandatory vaccines? What are some of the factors that you consider to be at play?
Well, we haven't done a complete analysis of the open-ended answers to these questions yet. But I think what is very clear is that younger people are happier to have been vaccinated to go to work. Whereas they are less satisfied about having to be vaccinated to go to school, to university, to a sporting event or restaurant. So age factors into this as well. Older South Africans are more willing to have, compulsory vaccination rules or vaccine mandates as well. And we also find, and this has happened in almost all our other findings, is that white South Africans are the least willing for both of these vaccine mandate measures at 32%. So there is something to note there. What's also interesting, that the provinces that show the lowest willingness for the vaccine mandates are the Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. The other interesting thing is that people with good education, sort of, post-matric education, are less willing. So that seems to be counterintuitive, but there you can see that there's a slight racial element there. There's some provincial differences and some age issues that we looked at.
Yeah, thank you for those insights. Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller there from the HSRC, just breaking it down for us there, including the dynamic that has to do with the population groupings in South Africa. Interesting and fascinating observations that they made there. It turns out support for mandatory vaccination as well as what is known as the vaccine passports is highest, at least from my reading of their data there, among Indian South Africans, followed by Black Africans. So I don't know what the dynamics are there, but you heard the prof there breaking it down for us in terms of level of education, life experience, etc., factoring into that conversation.